sitting here in my mother's home in New Mexico, on the very edge of our territory, more in the territory of what we now call the Sandia Pueblo people, at the base of the Sandia Mountains, my elder mountain that was here when I was brought home as a baby. And I was also adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life, and I was given the name Wiakpa Najinwi. And that translates maybe roughly in English to womaning, standing, shining. So I greet you from these two nations, from this part of the Mother Earth, and very, very happy to meet you and be here for the purpose for which you are gathered. So, you know, to tell the history of my name is to tell a lot of history. So I'll start with Patricia. So my mother named me after St. Patrick because, which, yes, right. She named me after St. Patrick because my due date was on St. Patrick's Day. And I ended up being born the day after George Washington's birthday. And she told me that I just missed being named Georgia. So, anyway, that was how my mom was thinking about naming her babies. So anyway, but later, you know, as I grew up and I thought about it, I thought, why in the world would an indigenous woman be named after St. Patrick? And, you know, I know that story is a little more complex than I probably understand, but you know, in sort of a very, very shorthand version, my understanding was that St. Patrick was the one they said that drove the snakes out of Ireland, which is, you know, code for driving out the earth-based cultures. And I'm learning more and more about that story. Nothing is ever black and white, I learned. But so I thought, how strange that I would be named after St. Patrick. And then Catherine. Catherine is my mother's, one of my mother's older sisters, and she was their protector of the whole family. My mom had 3 sisters and a brother. And then we get to McCabe, which is kind of the interesting part that relates to Ireland most directly. And so I was told this story. There's actually a few stories about how we came to have the name McCabe, but I've settled on this one so much. It makes so much sense to me. There were many different junctures in our family history where we could be given this name, but my cousin told me, he said that, you know, during that time when they were rounding up our people and taking them into these, taking them to the government agencies, that one of my relatives, I don't know if he was captured or turned himself in, but he was. And so he was being walked to this government agency called Fort Defiance in Arizona. And on the way, he befriended a soldier that was marching him. And this soldier was Irish. And apparently this Irish soldier fled Ireland from whatever difficulties were going on there and came to the United States, found himself in the United States. And so I always imagine this really touches my heart, and think about him, you know, his first thing that happens when he gets to the United States is he's conscripted into the US military. And his first job is to round up indigenous peoples. So my goodness, wow. So anyway, he finds himself walking with my relative, and they get to the agency. And when they arrive at the agency, you know, and this was common practice. It was also common practice in the boarding schools. They would say, you know, well, we can't pronounce your name. It doesn't make sense to us. It doesn't fit on the form. So we're just going to give you a name. And so the story is that this Irish soldier said to my relative, look, I said to the government agency, if he can't keep his own name, then please let me give him mine. And so it always makes me cry. That act of humanity and generosity in that very, very difficult moment for all parties concerned, for my family. And so this is how I come to carry the name McCabe. Our consent is so powerful. None of these things could have happened without our consent. And so that is something that we are really called upon to reclaim deeply and firmly, what it is that we give our consent to and what it is that we give our dissent to. Maybe some of you know our Ruth Bader Ginsburg here in the United States, and one of the phrases that is associated with her, even as many times as she stood against all of her colleagues in the Supreme Court was she would be the one voice saying, I dissent, I dissent. And so even though there are many layers of energies, actions, players, embodied and disembodied, going on all around us, the one thing that we can hold to without confusion is our free will and what we give our consent to and what we give our dissent to. So and we might say, well, it doesn't seem to matter whether I dissent. They just keep coming. They just run over us anyway. They just do whatever the heck they want. Well, it does matter whether you say, even as they are going to come and disregard seemingly your dissent. What happens when we are consciously giving our consent or our dissent is we engage spiritual law, the law of the sovereignty of all beings. And so when we engage that spiritual law with our consent, our clear consent or our dissent, then if they come and they overstep that boundary, there is an accounting that must come due. There is an accounting that must come due. We don't get to say when or where, but we can know that we are setting it up in the future for an accounting and an accountability to come due. Whereas if we believe that our consent and dissent has no meaning, and everything around us is trying to convince us of that. We were raised in schools that taught us to disregard our consent and dissent, that taught us, and all of our institutions in recent times train us to disregard that this is a free will construct and that there is the law of the sovereignty of all beings running here. It's a very big game. So wherever we're at in our spiritual path, wherever we're at in our understanding of historical events or our indigenous nature with this Mother Earth, that is one place where we can activate with some ease and some grace to always consciously be able to even say it out loud. I do not give my consent. I dissent to this Mother Earth being taken from me. I dissent to all this life being destroyed. I dissent to the inequality of treatment of humanity, but not only humanity, of the water, of the mountains, of the green life, of the four-leggeds, the flying ones, swimming ones, creepy crawling ones. I dissent. Declare it. Declare it in your body. But even maybe more importantly, because we know, it's an idea that I've been working with, that when we speaking in the negative or disagreeing with something has some power, but where there's real power is in understanding what we want and what we are moving towards, what we are directing our free will towards. So in other words, I've been saying to myself, I want to understand, what do I give my consent to? There's so many things I give my dissent to. That seems like endless list, especially right now, right? But what do I give my consent to? And I think this is a big, maybe part of our task. And so what I've been saying, it took me a while to work on this. And this is, maybe a question for you then, is to work this out for yourself based on where you're at right now and your understanding right now, and even what you're learning here in the Hedge School. But what I've said is, I give my consent only to the authority of the law of the heart of Mother Earth. I give my consent only to the authority of the law of the heart of Mother Earth.